Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to an evening with Alysaa Gazon-Roberts and Western United Credit Union. And we are streaming live from our headquarters at number 40 Fifth Street, Woodbrook, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. And before we get into our discussion this evening, I now introduce to you Ms. Hermina Charles, who would render the national anthem of Trinidad and Tobago, followed by In Times Like These. So let's stand now for the national anthem of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Words from the love of liberty in the gathered hope and prayer, with boundless faith in our destiny, we solemnly declare. Side by side we stand, islands of the blue Caribbean Sea, this our native land, we pledge our lives to thee. Every creed and race find an equal place, and may God bless our nation. Every creed and race find an equal place, and may God bless our nation. In times like these, you need a savior. In times like these, you need an anchor. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds and grip the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, he's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds and grip the solid rock. In times like these, you need the Bible. In times like these, oh, be not idle, be very sure, be very sure. Your anchor holds and grip the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, he's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your anchor holds and grip the solid rock. In times like these, I have a Savior in times like these. I have an anchor, I'm very sure. I'm very sure my anchor holds and grip the solid rock. Your anchor holds and grip the solid rock.
So once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And we are streaming live from our boardroom right here on number 45th Street, Port of Spain, Woodbrook, Trinidad and Tobago. And now I will introduce to you Miss Alysaa de Gazon-Roberts, who is going to share the evening with me. Good evening, Alysaa.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening and welcome, and thanks for taking the time for this exciting evening with us.
I'm excited to be here.
As in preparing for this evening, it really takes a lot. And looking at what is the right things to say, how to do the introduction. And one thing that came to my mind that is very, very evident is that throughout the Bible, it shows very clearly that God is a God who is passionate about relationships. And so that is where I'm going to start my introduction this evening. Because even the psalmist David said, and he asked God, because apparently he was so bewildered, why God is so interested in mankind. So he asked him, what is man that thou art so mindful of? The Son of Man, that you would care for him. You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. So that for me spoke very clearly of how important relationships are. That God, the Creator, who needs no one at all, will take the time to communicate with mankind. So, Alysaa, let's jump right in. What is relationship, or what is a relationship?
All right, so we're jumping into the deep end, I see.
Yes.
But I would say a relationship really speaks to that association or that connection that we have with other individuals or groups, or as you said, that higher power. So as human beings, as mammals, we are a very social species, which means that most of us crave connection. And human beings are almost driven by this desire to be noticed and to be seen. We want to make sure that somebody sees us, someone acknowledges us, that we exist in their world. And as a very introverted person myself, during COVID restrictions, I found this renewed appreciation for those relationships and the connections that we all share, that I share with my family members and my friends. And I'm certain that, our viewers can identify with that importance of relationship.
So I am guessing, and my second question would have been, why is relationship so important to the human development of mankind?
Yes, well, it's how we find meaning. It's how we make sense of the world. So kind of like right now, through our engagement and our dialogue, there is a bond and an understanding of the world and experiences. So when you consider our lifespan, it's through our relationships that we get our needs met. So as a newborn, when we are helpless, we relied on our caregivers and we trusted that our caregivers would provide for us. And then, later on, we learned new things and we made sense of the world through walking and crawling. We made friends, we had romantic partners, and we really rely on others during difficult times. So through society, through how we interact with others, we learn what is right and what's wrong and what's acceptable and what isn't so much. So at that biological level, when it comes to the human brain, it's how we're made up. So there are certain hormones and neurotransmitters and all those big fancy words that come into play when we talk about human development and interaction. So things like oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine, all of those happy hormones. So during it's actually shown in research that during those early stages of romance, couples are known to have higher levels of oxytocin. So it's almost like our bodies are made for that connection. And oxytocin is known as that cuddle hormone. It makes us feel all of those warm and fuzzy, enhancing things like, trust and empathy and fidelity and wanting to communicate in a positive way and bonding. So those are all things that define our human experience, and it's what sets us apart from all of the other animals that inhabit the earth. So that genuine human connection is that bond that we feel with somebody beyond attraction, beyond all of the fun activities. It's about feeling supported and that mutual openness and availability that we share. And of course, we know that the ability to be vulnerable, bearing yourself, flaws and all, plays a huge part in connection as well. So it all contributes to how we show up and engage in the world.
Wow, what a beautiful explanation. One of the things that stuck with me, which leads directly into the other question, and you said lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes our lifespan depends on healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So my other question is, why is it so important for us to have healthy relationships and not relationships that just seems to suck the life out of us?
Yeah, I get that. To begin, I would say that the psychologist Maslow, we may or may not have heard of him many moons ago. He spoke about a hierarchy of needs. And in that hierarchy of needs, our survival needs are paramount, of course, that being needing food and air and safety. But just after that comes that need for human connection. So our need to belong comes just secondary after eating and oxygen and safety. A human being needs emotional connection and acceptance and affection and support and respect and belonging. And you could see why a healthy connection could impact us, because healthy connections really protects our mental health. It helps us to cope with the stresses of life, and our network, our support systems can really lower our chances of feeling down and depressed through that fellowship. And this was totally apparent throughout the pandemic, where we saw and we felt firsthand how the removal of those networks and those connections really was linked to this drastic decline in a lot of people's mental health. So in terms of healthy connection, it really even matters when it comes to our physical health and our longevity. So healthy relationships are important because it can affect our physiological health. It dictates how we deal with stress and how we recover from illness. And research says that it actually can even influence how long we live. So, particularly in this time of COVID and lockdown, we've heard about these stories of infection and recovery, and even in those very unfortunate experiences of loss, we saw how they were all framed through connection and relationships. And that's really what is taking us through. So that's why healthy relationships are paramount, because it influences all these different aspects of our experience.
So healthy relationships gives us the strength and the courage to press on, to move forward, especially when we are having a challenging moment, especially in a time like COVID. This is a time when all of us truly need to be there and rallying and comforting and encouraging each other. So, Alysaa, what are the threats to healthy relationships? How can we identify some of these threats that would really, for want of a better word, stomp us as a human being from really blossoming in our relationships?
Yes, that's a loaded question. All of those, red and green flags. So I would say in unhealthy relationships, there is this common thread of feeling a lot of anxiety. People can report feeling very unsafe, just this lingering thread of lack of safety, a lot of uncertainty, feeling confused even. So there are a couple things that can hurt a relationship and that may be a threat to a relationship. And we see things like dismissiveness. You may see that popping up in terms of your dynamic, where someone minimizes your concerns, or just kind of brushes off your feelings, or what you want to talk about on that day. Maybe even a lack of trust. And I think one thing I want to point out is that trust is earned and built over time. But when you see that lack of trust without any reason, that is definitely something that can hurt a relationship. So we come back to that need for safety, that need for our partners to be reliable and predictable, particularly in this time where all sorts of chaos may be occurring. We need that predictability. We need someone that we don't feel we need to compromise our core values all the time. Yeah. And of course, there is space for compromise. But when you find yourself compromising your core values, the things that make you, you,
Who
there
you
is,
are.
yes, there is that feeling of sacrifice. And yes, there is a place for sacrifice, but when we find ourselves cutting off parts, major parts of who we are, then it leads to that resentment. So we see that unhealthy relationships can sometimes be built on that feeling of not being safe enough to tell your partner how you feel, because you're afraid that your partner will make you feel bad or threaten you if you acknowledge your feelings. And when we talk about that threat, it would be remiss of me not to touch on those relationships where there's a power differential happening. So we see that particularly in abusive relationships where the nature of a relationship is to be equitable. And in an abusive relationship, we see the corruption of that equitable nature of a relationship where there is this space of power and control that's entered, where one partner feels entitled to punish or regulate another person as a way to dominate them. So there is a pattern of violence. And I want to point out here that there are behaviors that aren't physically violent. So there's no physical bruise, but it can still inflict pain. So when we talk about that emotional manipulation and humiliating someone, and even one that a lot of us may know about, that silent treatment, holding of affection. So some research actually says that the act of ignoring or excluding somebody can activate the same place in the brain associated with physical pain. Yeah. So that is painful, to be excluded, to be ignored. And it's something that we don't pay a lot of attention to. We're like, well, I'm not talking to you, but it can leave an impact. Yeah. And of course, there are other behaviors. When working with couples, I like to describe a particular approach as the 4 horsemen. There's an approach that says the 4 horsemen, which is a behavior that could really escalate conflict and damage the relationship as it goes on. So it talks about criticism and how damaging that can be between partners when that's how the pattern of communication, and when a partner becomes defensive, or when they stonewall, meaning that they just shut down, there's no communication happening. So all of these things can interplay and really erode the quality of the relationship.
One of the things that I heard coming out from this is listening to each other, communicating very clearly. And then you mentioned something that triggered shaming. Shaming came to my mind because it is important that once someone is in a relationship, any kind of relationship, there's supposed to be trust there. And with the absence of trust comes a lot of confusion, because you're wondering, I wonder if I can be vulnerable to this person. And I don't think that it is healthy for someone to be in a relationship and not be able to be vulnerable, to express my fears and my concerns. I'm not feeling well. And one thing I am always putting in a plug for the men. I know of men who are abused. We tend to focus a lot on the woman, and that's fine. But I always wanted to ensure that the men get their equal play, because there are men who are abused, not physically all the time, but emotionally and mentally, by the words that are spoken to them, the behavior, the attitude that is put towards them, that sends them into a shell and confusion that they just don't know how to function.
Yes, that's true. And there is this stigma associated with the experience of that emotional manipulation and with men who experience that violence, and we need to work very, very intentionally to remove that stigma.
Yeah. So we are living in a pandemic. We are all shut in together. Mental health is extremely important. So there are persons who, or husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, I now have to face you. I can no longer hide. I can no longer stay at work late. I can no longer go to the bar or go with a partner in line. I have to face you. How do we, as human beings, in the midst of all of this chaos, manage conflicts within the relationships?
Mm. Hmm. Well, where do I begin? I think it's important to realize that conflict is inevitable. A lot of times we want to avoid conflict, we want to avoid anger, but anger is another emotion, and it's until we give anger power that it spirals out of control. So conflict is inevitable in relationships, but how you manage it.
And if I can just come in here, I hope I don't throw your thought off,
Okay.
but I think why we see conflict as such a dirty word or something that we should avoid is that we don't really understand that conflict could be a healthy thing. It
Mhm,
does not have to be adversarial, but
mhm,
we can express exactly how we feel in a calm and loving, peaceful manner to get some kind of resolution. So
mhm.
maybe if we switch how we think or how we perceive conflict to be, things might be a bit easier in relationships.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be belittling or defacing or anything like that.
Mhm. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what happens during conflict, and hopefully that can reframe the experience for a lot of our viewers. So it how we manage conflict is what really determines how our relationship will go. So I want to state here that any violence or threats or intimidation is never okay. So we're not talking about that dynamic. We're talking about when there is typical conflict. And when you and your partner fight, it actually activates a part in your brain called the amygdala. So that little part of your brain can cause a lot of big problems. So what happens is that the amygdala lights up when we feel threatened. So
Mhm.
usually refer to it as our caveman brain, right? Because how it works is it will cause you to react if there's a lion running towards you to attack.
Yes,
It will save your life. But
yes,
our brains have not gotten to the point of discernment between the lion attacking us and an argument about who didn't wash the wares tonight. So you will still go into that fight or flight.
yeah,
And even further, recently there are even more steps. So you can go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Yes, and fawning is when we try to be the good one in the conflict. So we are easygoing, we avoid in conflict. And that is actually an aspect of people pleasing. So we need to consider if we are responding to conflict in the fawning way as well. But when the amygdala starts to light up and all this stuff is going on, in that moment, you see your partner as a person that you need to win against them. So you need to win this competition. This person is not somebody you are going to win with. So
I
at
will
that
have the last say.
yes, at that point, all compassion and empathy gone out the window. Yeah, so your
Yes.
heart is beating and you become flooded. So what happens when we get flooded is that our nervous system is overloaded by this apparent threat. So we start to sweat, the heart is beating so fast, our throat starts to close up, which actually affects the tone of our voice. So that's why our tone goes up because we're trying to get the words out. Yeah.
Yes.
So we're breathing heavy. Now, you tell me who is having an effective conversation in that state, right? So even more, your muscles are tense. So a lot of times we'll see the crossing. So your posture gets aggressive or it gets totally closed off, right? And no communication is happening. So at that point, it's important to note that our attachment wounds, so a lot of wounds from childhood, can be activated when we feel threatened. So we are getting triggered, our body is going through all of this stuff, and we're feeling these feelings of rejection and abandonment and loss and grief, and we need to win. So if we're not careful, some very maladaptive coping skills can be engaged. So that's where you will see the lashing out. That's where you'll see someone shuts down or projection starts to happen, which is why it's so important to stay mindful. Reminding yourself that there is no lion here coming at you. This is your partner, your whole doo-doo darling. Yes?
Yes.
So after you recognize that it is your pumpkin pie in front of you, hopefully the fight or flight will begin to subside. And then you can move on to understanding, which is always the goal in conflict. You have to understand before you can come up with solutions. So when working with couples, I say if you have come away from a conflict not being able to clearly state the perspective of your partner, the whole point of conflict was missed.
Yes.
Because this person is your partner. They're not your parent. They're not your dependent. They are your ally. It's your teammate. Yes?
Yes.
So in that moment, I would implore us all, I do it, to say to yourself very gently, do I want to be right or do I want to be connected? Do I want to win and be by myself or do I want the team to win?
Yes.
And I'm very honest, maybe sometimes you say, no, I want to win. But then you have to search yourself and know what the cost of winning is. So you have to recognize that's your teammate. And once you do that, you take that time to regulate yourself because remember, I just described what's happening to your body. So it's likely that you'll need a little bit of time to calm down. And it's said that after being flooded, we need a good 20 to 30 minutes to kind of restore ourselves from the impact. So take some deep breaths, maybe take a break, commit to coming back after. But in that time that we're taking the break, we're taking a break. We're not sending memes to each other and WhatsApping each other. It's not back to business as usual because those aren't apologies. We need to de-escalate. We need to ask for a break, not stonewalling, not shutting down and walking out and we go in the car and, turn the keys and we're out. We have to ask for a break or just a pause. Yes, and it's so important for us to learn how to apologize effectively. And I think it ties into what you were just saying about shame. Because if we think about why we are so resistant to apologizing, it's because a resistance to apologizing usually signifies a feeling of shame and defensiveness. So we're not proud of how we acted or what we said. So we don't want to apologize and admit that we were in the wrong. Shame makes us feel incredibly unlovable, incredibly isolated. So the only way to address that shame is through connection and remembering that you are actually loved by your partner. Yes. So you have to express what you feel, not what you think, because we always say, well, I find you XYZ, or I think you did XYZ. No. I feel all of those lovely I statements. Let's use them. I feel this.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would also say that most of our conflicts, they aren't effectively resolved because there are so many hidden issues that are the real source. So we're arguing about the dishes, but there's something underlying. And those hidden issues are what we need to navigate in a very careful way, in a way that makes everybody feel seen and fulfilled. So you have to pay attention to those argument patterns. It could be as simple as saying, I noticed that when we argue, X this happen. And when X happens, I feel Y. So calling out those patterns is the first step that we take in addressing them. And sometimes we just need to learn to accept differences and how people see things. It doesn't mean that we're right or wrong or what. We want the team to win. So remember, if you don't take away anything else, do I want to be right or do I want to be connected?
Yes. And I like the part with the I. And as we said, I feel hurt. My partner must say, I hear you.
Yes.
I'm listening to you.
Validation.
I respect your feeling.
Yes.
It's not as I feel and your mind wandering off down Frederick Street, not even listening to what your partner is saying. We go to a quick commercial break and we will be right back.
One day I went to work and they said I had a gas pain and I ended up in the hospital. While I was in the hospital, they tell me I need to do an angiogram. 14,000 something to do the angiogram. Then they said I have to do a heart surgery, open heart surgery, $175,000. I was able to get help out to get the loan to see about my operation to the credit union. While I was doing that, I ended up in a coma for 10 days, which went over the amount of $175,000. And they stand up with me and paid all my bills. And I'm living testimony to say that I'm going to sit down here talking today. And from there on, I never left there, and they helped me a great deal in life. To bring up my children, send them to school, buy new vehicle, pay for vehicle, insurance, everything.
Good evening and welcome back to an evening with Alysaa, Gazon-Roberts and Western United Credit Union. And our webinar this evening is entitled Getting the Best of Your or From Your Relationships. So, Alysaa, I was really enjoying our conversation, not realizing that our time is so short and limited now. And we have only just begun to start. So very quickly, what I'm going to do, because I think it is very important for us to touch on all these little nuggets, questions, and to hear from you. So my next question would have been, what are some of the things we can look for to recognize a healthy relationships in our lives?
Mhm.
And can I hit you another one time?
Yes.
Right? And how can we manage to find peace after experiencing hurt or abuse in our relationships?
Ooh, that's two big ones. Okay. So when we talk about recognizing the healthy relationships in our life, we often put a lot of focus on, the red flags. What are the red flags? The things that we don't want. But we need to put a lot of energy into recognizing the green flags, or how we want to be loved. I would say most of the strongest relationships that I've seen, they almost develop their own culture. So there is this shared culture, and a lot of traditions and values. Again, the idea of core values coming back into play, and their own rules. They make up their own rules. And it could look strange to somebody looking in, but that's the value of connection. It's okay if it looks strange, because once both partners are experiencing that consistent feeling of safety and connection and love and support, it's fine. So some of the things that we want to see in our healthy relationships surrounds that feeling that your partner and you take responsibility when you mess up, and you admit it. You own your feelings. You feel that yes, you really have a partner. You have this willingness to work on your relationship, forgive and repair, and communicating your needs. Say what you need. In working with couples, I always hear, well, he or she should know what I want. Nobody's a mind reader. So you have to communicate your wants, and more importantly, your needs, right? Because that could be
Yes.
very empowering, and it could definitely facilitate intimacy. So be mindful that you're not making a negative request. So, and what I mean by that is that we often communicate what we don't want. So don't ignore me, or don't do this. We maybe need to say, I need you to pay attention to me when I'm speaking. Those are ways to communicate our needs,
Put
Be
down the phone, come off Facebook.
yes, be present, and having that openness to hearing feedback and talking about your relationship. I would say have regular connecting meetings. So not those operational things of the relationship. We do that all the time. We always list in what we need to buy, what we need to do, where we need to go, who we need to see. But think about these meetings as almost like a state of the union. So I do them at my house. What do we feel? What are our goals as a couple? What has been working for us? What hasn't been working for us? What do we need to stop doing? And we can get so bogged down by just the daily rigmarole of life that we forget the connection outside of the arguments is required. So those are, as concisely as I could give it, the green flags when it comes to managing that hurt. What I heard when you said it is that elusive thing of closure. Oh, goodness. Closure, right? And it's usually tied to some action involving the person who wronged us. And we need this last conversation. We need the last whatever it is. But
Yes.
I like to say that closure is this process that you create for yourself to help you move along. So the reality is, more often than not, a person may not be ready or available to give you closure. And you will have to count that issue as resolved without them. Yeah. So
I
when
got you.
Mhm.
Yes.
When you
Yes.
wait on someone to give you that thing for you to find your peace, you remain under their thumb. You remain beholden to this person. And you will be forever stuck waiting for certain conditions to be satisfied for you to accept that, okay, the end is here. So you need to decide what you want and how to let go. And yes, it is difficult. But I think some of the practices that can help us is that self-compassion, because a lot of times when we were wronged, we lose trust in ourselves. Not talking about people, other people, we lose trust in ourselves, and we can come down so hard on ourselves for not knowing better, when in fact we should be doing the opposite. We should be incredibly gentle with ourselves.
And one of the things that I heard when you were speaking in terms of repairing a broken relationship and understanding that it is okay that if you make an attempt to repair a broken relationship and your partner isn't ready, that instead of forcing that person to speak or to reach the point where you are, you let them know, when you are ready, I am here. But
Yes.
as far as I am concerned, I have forgiven and I am ready to move on. Let
Yeah.
us repair, let us learn to love each other once again. And I know that time is running out, but I want to address, and maybe I would save the other questions for part 2, because I am quite sure that there is going to be a part 2 in getting the best from your relationship. But before we move on, I want to address the importance of forgiveness. Forgiving the other party or forgiving yourself for the mistakes that you may have made in your relationship, and more so forgiving the person who may have harmed you. Not that you may want to have a relationship with them, but forgiving them so that you would be able to free yourself from that place of victimhood to move on to the future. That's what I want to talk about before we leave. Forgiveness, learning to let it go.
Yes. I think, it's important to acknowledge the person's experience, and knowing that their experience isn't invalid. But a lot of times it's based on this black and white narrative, and people can be so much more complex. So what has happened is there was a wounding that happened, and one person is unable to explain their wounding, and then the other person is unable to see due to their own wounding. So we have two harmed people working here. Now, yes, it's totally possible to acknowledge somebody's experience and forgive them for having wronged you. And it's still possible to deny them access to you. Yes. So there's
Yes.
where the boundary comes in, because we are in this state of being healed and in the process of healing. So there isn't a point where we could just shut off and say, well, yes, I have been closured. I'm fully healed. I am ready to move on. We have to build resilience. Allow yourself to grieve the loss. Yeah.
Alysaa, unfortunately, we are running out of time.
That is okay.
I have just begun. I'm so excited that this conversation is really going so well. And for those of us who, I just want to, in terms of forgiveness, I want people to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to allow the person back into your space. But the forgiveness is for you as an individual, so that you can, as Alysaa just said, break free from being under the person's thumb and find new hope and a new beginning for yourself as you learn to forgive. And maybe in forgiving, you may give that person who is also hurting an opportunity for healing to start in their lives. So, Alysaa, I promise you, we will come back to part 2 of this, and we will start right where we left off in terms of forgiveness and how do we really forgive, what it means, the healing process it can bring to us. So now I am going to invite one of our directors, Mr. Michael J.T. Scipio, to bring the closing remarks for us.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the credit union and all the people who have taken their time out to be a part of this webinar to receive the information, this wealth of information, even though cut short from you today, would really like to say a heart-warming and heartfelt thank you, because during this period, I feel like if it can easily be taken for granted, the importance of these values that you have bestowed upon us today, especially for people who would have been in quarantine situations where are now forced to be in an enclosed environment, constantly seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly of the individuals that you would see on a daily basis. It takes a mental and emotional toll on us, and I feel like these words and this wisdom that you would have imparted on us today, it is such a necessity that we can be nothing but grateful for this opportunity to hear your words of wisdom. And on behalf of all the viewing members and Western United Credit Union, I'd like to say thank you for your time and thank you for this opportunity to interact with you on this platform.
Thank you so much, Michael. And Alysaa, I too would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing those beautiful, inspiring, encouraging words, little tips, big tips, I should say, not little, but big tips, because at the end of the day, this can truly help us to transform our lives. So I want to say thank you. Thanks for your team. And please be prepared in September for part 2 of getting the best out of your relationships. And we would start exactly where we left off, at forgiveness. So I don't know if you want to say anything before you go.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been, an honor to be here. I really appreciate the discussion and so many comments and questions. I wish I could get to them all, but hopefully during part 2.
Yes, part 2. We will definitely address those comments. And of course, they can post their questions and all of that on Facebook, and we can easily get it on to you. So as Ms. Hermina Bino Charles sweetly sing as I close off, I will just like to leave you all with some quotes. The Secret is a very beautiful book that I love, and I believe in the law of attraction. So I have 3 quotes for you this evening, and it says, the more love you feel, the greater your power to create a magnificent life of love, joy, and harmony. So feel love. When any person say, I am tired, or I am broke, I am sick, I am overweight, the genie says, your wish will be my command. So what do you want to attract to yourself? What do you want in your relationship, even amidst the many challenges? And the more you think about what you desire, that is what is going to present itself at your doorstep. So if you think negative thoughts, that is what is going to present itself. If you think positive things into your relationship, then your relationship is going to continue to blossom into what it is supposed to be. And never forget that you are vibrating a frequency every single second. The higher your frequency, the more good you will attract to you. So, Old Negro Spiritual, Kathleen Battle, Lord, how come me here? And fix me, Jesus, fix me. I invite you to listen to those two songs as you reflect on your relationship to bring the necessary healing into it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end. Good evening, good night, and God bless all of you.
In times like these, you need a savior. In times like these, you need an anchor. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your ankles and grip the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your ankles and grip the solid rock. In times like these, you need the Bible. In times like these, oh, be not idle, be very sure, be very sure. Your ankles and grip the solid rock. This rock is Jesus. Yes, He's the one. This rock is Jesus, the only one. Be very sure. Be very sure. Your ankles and grip the solid rock. In times like these, I have a Savior. In times like these, I have an anchor. I'm very sure. I'm very sure. My ankles and grip the solid rock. Your ankles and grip the solid rock.